Hi there, it's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back to your Aquatic Industry Insider. In this video, I'm going to be presenting an interview I did with Beckie Ramsay from the nonprofit organization Doing It for Dylan. Dylan was a 13-year-old boy who died in a quarry in England in 2011. His mother, Beckie, has made it her job to go out and educate in her community throughout the UK about the risks of cold water shock and open water swimming. I hope you enjoy this interview, and I hope you are able to share some of these learnings within your community or in your water safety education efforts. Thanks so much for being here. I never take that for granted. Hi everyone, it's Katie Crysdale here at Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. I'm really excited today to be able to chat with Beckie Ramsay about the water safety initiative that she's been working on to increase water safety and drowning prevention around quarries. So welcome, Beckie. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for having me.
Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit what it is that you're doing in this area?
My name's Beckie Ramsay, and I run a water safety campaign called Doing It for Dylan. And basically, I teach children and adults and services, groups, clubs, anybody that will listen to me really. I'll teach them about water safety and about staying safe in and around open water. It's not just specific to quarries. It is actually all open water, but I do, obviously my son died in a quarry, so quarry safety is really high on my list of agendas. Do you know what I mean?
Of course. Could you tell us a little bit about Dylan's story and what caused you to start this organization, Doing It for Dylan?
Absolutely. So it was the 3rd of July 2011, and Dylan had basically Dylan was very physically fit. Dylan was very able. Dylan was a good swimmer. It was the hottest day of the year, and he made an uneducated choice to go swimming in a disused quarry with a couple of friends. Now, he was fine for around about 20 minutes. He was laughing and joking. He was messing around with his friends in the water. Um, After 20 minutes, something happened that made Dylan call for help more than once. He called for help 3 times. And there was some Polish men at the top of the quarry who saw Dylan's pleas for help, but they didn't realise he was shouting help. They thought he was shouting hello because of the language barrier. So they waved at him. There was actually the people that got to my son and pulled him out of the water, gave him CPR until help came. That's what led me to wanting to start doing it for Dylan. I tragically lost my firstborn son, and it was a needless tragedy. It didn't need to happen. If there was more education around, my son would not have lost his life. If he'd have known what to do, my son wouldn't have lost his life. If water safety equipment was in place, potentially my son wouldn't have lost his life. If there was barriers or signs in place, there's so many things that could have prevented him from going in there. He was such a good lad that, you know what, he actually paid attention to rules and regulations. Do you know what I mean? It's not like he would have climbed that fence. I know there are many, many teenagers out there that would climb that fence anyway if there was a fence there. There was a fence around the quarry, but it was open access, so there was slats missing from it. You could just like get through, and also you could get like round the side of the fence if that makes sense. So I basically, the day that Dylan died, I immediately told the world that if this wasn't on the national curriculum, then I would go and teach children and young people about water safety. And at that point, I didn't have a clue myself about water safety. I didn't have a clue about anything. All I knew was that if my son could die like this, then so could anybody else's in the world. So yeah, I went away and I educated myself. I literally educated myself on statistics, on how people can drown, the process, cold water temperatures, cold water shock, spoke about riptides. Literally, I clued myself up on it as much as I possibly could. And then came the hard work when I was banging on schools' doors, asking them to let me come in and share my story. And that wasn't easy, to be honest, because what school wants a mum coming in talking about the dead son? You know, I'm just being really harsh here, but that was the cold, harsh reality of it. Schools didn't really want me to come in and share that pain with their children. Um, I did continually knock on these schools' doors until eventually I was able to go into some schools. Like I went into my first two schools very uneducated. I didn't have a clue about water safety. I just knew Dylan's story, and the impact that that had. That was what spurred me on to educating myself to ensure that I could then go out and give the correct information to people. So I spent the 6 week holidays. Obviously, Dylan died on the 3rd of July. The holidays started about the 20th, 21st. And I educated myself over that whole 6 weeks. I literally didn't sleep properly. I wasn't eating, obviously through grief as well. But I really just wanted to make a difference. So like I say, I educated myself. I questioned the authorities. I questioned the people in the know. I questioned the police, the fire service. I wanted to know water-related fatalities, statistics. I wanted to know how bad of an issue we had. And when all these things came to light, I was just blown away. And there's no way that I could let my son just die for nothing. It just it wasn't gonna happen. It's never ever gonna happen. And I promised my son that I would ensure that there would be change, and that his death wouldn't be in vain.
For the location where your son went swimming, was it a popular area in your community to swim, or were there no other places to go because it was so hot? Because one of the challenges we have here in Canada is that those quarries are not, or whatever location, like you said, there's no fences, there's no barriers. They don't make any attempt to block off areas that might be dangerous from people swimming when they're hot.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So here wasn't really barriers. There's not really many places to go swimming locally. Obviously we've got our local swimming baths, which is a bus journey away, but actually within walking distance, it is quarries or ponds. Do you know what I mean? And that is
Mhm.
where our young people are going to flock to when the weather gets hot. I know over here in the UK we have tried a few initiatives where quarries are concerned, and we've actually dyed them black, and that has actually been 100% effective in the two quarries that it's been done in. Obviously, it makes them less inviting, and it's a lot cheaper than putting £1 million fence round that potentially a teenager's going to climb over anyway. Do you know what I mean? Visually, they're going to look at this water and they're going to think that looks not very nice. It's not inviting, and actually, they don't choose to get in it. It's only food colouring that they put in, so it's not like it's harmful to the environment. It's not harmful to any wildlife or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good thing to have in place. But more so than that, it's mainly the education, landowners taking responsibility for what they own, because they've took the money out now. Let's be honest. Now we've got these quarries here, there, and everywhere. They're just death traps. They are just death traps. They serve no purpose once they've been mined. And you know, it should really be either put back to its former state, or should be filled in, or should be used for something else. But it shouldn't be allowed to continue. They shouldn't be allowed to continually gather rainwater till it gets to a height of where kids and adults and young people can lose their life.
And one of the ways I got connected to your story and your son's story, I was on TikTok, and you know how TikTok shows you other things that you might be interested in. And I found a TikTok you had done at the World Drowning Prevention Conference, and that's how I got connected to your story. And I believe in the universe kind of coincidences, because the next day I opened up a travel magazine and one of the advertisements was literally a man jumping off the edge of a cliff at a quarry in North Carolina. And I thought, what is wrong with us that we think that this is how we should showcase a place to go and visit? We have
Exactly.
so many issues like this in Canada, and it seems like it's a much bigger issue than people are talking about.
Absolutely, it's a worldwide issue. I mean, the WHO, World Health Organization, have brought out now a National Drowning Prevention Day, so we have that now every year. I think we're on either our second or third year this year. That's on the 15th of May. Now, the fact that doing it for Dylan was mentioned at the World Drowning Prevention Conference, like blew me away. I didn't even know it was happening. I got a call from a friend saying, "Did you know that doing it for Dylan was going to be mentioned?" And I was like, absolutely, I didn't have a clue. I did not have a clue. So I was pretty blown away. My name was alongside some pretty big players in the world of water safety. You know what I mean? So I was pretty blown away. Yeah, I mean that's probably one of my greatest achievements, even though I wasn't there to see it. I didn't actually attend it. I wasn't involved in it. Like to see that worldwide people were seeing what I was doing was massive to me. It was absolutely massive. And I just thought, well, Dylan's right beside me, ensuring that this is getting out there and ensuring that it does go worldwide, ensuring that the message does get heard in other places. We lose, what is it, 271,000 people a year worldwide? That's a shocking statistic. And the worst thing about it is that so many of these deaths are preventable. That is the real sadness about this, that our governments, our people in authority, our people that can make the decisions don't. That's the problem. They don't make the decision to educate the children, and they don't make the decision to penalise the landowners, which leaves us with this open book of children, teenagers, young people think that it's okay to go and okay to go swimming in places like quarries and stuff like that. And on top of that, you've also then got adults doing the same thing. So children look up to those adults and obviously copy what they're doing.
I did want to acknowledge, I thought it was amazing that your organization was mentioned at the World Drowning Prevention Conference. And I actually think it's really important that we invest in these smaller organizations that are working on water safety and drowning prevention. Myself, my background as a lifeguard and a swim instructor, I do believe in those big organizations like the Royal Life Saving Society. They do have a huge function, but I think sometimes it's these individual stories and these nimble, smaller organizations that can really have more of a one-to-one impact. Like you can be relatable to those groups of school children. You can be relatable within your community. It's not just this big fancy organization that has, slick marketing campaigns and beautiful messaging, but I really think it connects better with people when you have a real person's story or a real face to hear from.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, when I go into schools, I'm not going to obviously mention any other organisations, but I do go into schools and they tell me that other organisations have been in, bigger organisations, and they say that I've hit the children like more than what these big organisations did. But I suppose um, when I go and do a presentation or go to a school or a college or a university, everything is done age appropriate and nothing's scripted. So you're not going to get the same presentation twice, if that makes sense. I can go into the same school and teach the same classroom full of kids, two different lessons, and they'd be totally different. Do you know what I mean? And I think relating to my aim is to get those children to think that they could be another Dylan. They could be the next Dylan.
What are some of the lessons that you share that you think would benefit them, or maybe lessons that your son didn't have that they need to hear?
I think definitely children need to know about cold water shock, and parents and adults. The first time I ever heard the words cold water shock was when we was discussing how my son could have lost his life. So that's an absolute massive thing for me, that cold water shock. It's a little bit more known about now because I've screamed and shouted about it for almost 13 years. But when I'm on the news or on the radio, a news article or doing a newspaper article or whatever, I always think to myself, it's not teenagers that's going to actually view this, it's parents, it's adults. And I think it's actually reaching the right people at the right age in the right place. And I think the only place that we can actually do that is at schools. Start where they're young and continue it into colleges, and then they've then got the skills and the knowledge to pass on to their children and their loved ones. One of my main messages when I go into schools and colleges and stuff is to please share Dylan's story with one other person, and then that way hopefully the message is spreading even wider than what I could possibly imagine. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and I think it's important. Could you define cold water shock for us, Becky? Because in certain parts of the world, it would never occur to people. What is cold water shock, and what are the temperatures? Do you know the temperatures in the quarry that your son was drowning in, or do you know what approximately it was?
Yeah, it was approximately 13 degrees in the quarry that Dylan died in on the day that he died, which isn't, super cold. Cold water shock is basically if you've ever had this is how I explain it to children. So um, I'm not trying to like make anybody feel any certain way. I'm just trying to describe it the best way that I can so that you can understand it. So for to children, what I say is if you've ever got into a shower and the shower's on freezing cold, it's on the wrong temperature, it takes your breath away, you gasp for breath. Yeah. Cold water shock is very much like that. So say you fall into the water or get into the water purposely, i.e. jumping into the water, your body will then take that massive breath in. You'll have it's an involuntary gasp reflex. You don't have like any choice over it. If you then swallow water, whilst you're having that involuntary gasp reflex because you've gone into the water, that's when you're in trouble. That's when you're going to start to panic, maybe hyperventilate. You could have problems. There's so many things that could happen to you where cold water shock's concerned. Now, I was told that Dylan actually passed a cold water shock, but I don't actually believe that that was the case because Dylan had been in the water 20 minutes, and cold water shock's a pretty instant thing. So what we suggest is that people obviously, if they're going to go into open water that's not lifeguarded, because my first rule, I suppose, is no lifeguard, no swimming. And I think that if people followed that rule, we'd have a lot less drownings. So that's kind of my motto. But if people are going to still take the risk where there aren't any lifeguards and people are going to go swimming recreationally or whatever, then my advice would be to get into the water slowly, acclimatise, splash your face, splash your neck, splash the back of your neck. Maybe even get on your back and float for a couple of seconds. If you do find that you've jumped into the water and you've started that involuntary gasp reflex and stuff like that, if you try and get onto your back and float like a starfish, that's going to give you your best chance of survival.
I mean, cold water is a real issue where I am in Western Canada. We have the mountains with their glacier fed lakes, and they're very scenic. A lot of tourists will come out in the summer and not realize that they never warm up. They truly are frigid all year round. And we constantly, every year, unfortunately, have tourists fall in, or they're trying to take photos, or they try and jump in off a boat and they don't realize it's not going to be warm at all. And it
Yeah,
is exactly what you described. Those first few minutes, they
yeah,
cannot catch their breath. They cannot necessarily move their limbs to get themselves out of the water. They cannot swim to shore. And it's a tragedy, but it's these open water spaces that they're not lifeguarded. There's no way for us to lifeguard these lakes because they're not intended to be swimming.
exactly, exactly. They're not intended to be swimming, and that's the point, I suppose. I think people need to take, some responsibility as well for their own actions. I take a lot of responsibility for what happened to Dylan because I didn't teach him about water safety, and as a parent, that was my job to do that. But I will also back that up with how could I teach my son something that I had never been taught? I had never been taught about cold water shock. I'd never been taught about undercurrents, riptides, underwater debris. You can think the basics, I suppose. Like, I mean, as a mum, I would have probably thought the water will be a bit cold. It's dangerous. There might be things under it that you could put your feet on and stuff like that. But even myself, I probably wouldn't have seen it as a massive issue. Being just open water if you're a good swimmer. And it was only after losing somebody that you realise that that's not the case, or it's only when you're affected by a drowning that you realise that that's not the case. Actually, drownings can happen to anyone, anywhere, any age, any sex, any religion, any race. Nobody, water's indiscriminate. It doesn't discriminate who it takes. And if you don't respect the water, it doesn't respect you. You've got to put certain things in place, i.e. wetsuits, i.e. buoyancy aids, i.e. life-saving equipment around these open waters. And a lot of people won't put the life-saving equipment in because they think that encourages swimmers. Now, I totally disagree with that, because I think that if there's I don't know, like a piece of life-saving equipment there, it's saying to me that that place is dangerous. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't think we've got the answers. I really don't. I think we're making progress, but slow, albeit slow. I think it's really frustrating because some of the things that I've been shouting about for 13 years are literally just coming into play now, and that's really frustrating that it's took 13 years to filter through to big organisations or whatever, especially considering I've worked with a lot of these big organisations.
Well, and it's that bureaucracy you mentioned that I used to find so frustrating when I worked at my local community center, because I would have an idea, we would want to do it, but then it has to be approved by the head of recreation and then the head of community services. And then
Yeah,
corporate management has to consider if it's a liability. And like you said, rescue equipment is not a liability. It's
no,
not saying we encourage people to swim. It's saying we know people do swim. It's really unfortunate because in that one particular community, my last municipal job, the kids would jump in off the bridge in the river when the river got warm, pretty high in the summer. And it's a very trafficked bridge. It's a very shallow part of the river. It's a very fast moving current. And yet the thinking of putting up some rescue equipment is going to encourage more kids to swim. Well, they're already swimming. They're already
yeah,
going in July. It's already happening.
yeah. That's it. I mean, it's the bureaucracy around it and the politics around it is absolutely unbelievable. I can't believe the red tape that people have got to go through. Like, that's one thing that I can say, being just me, myself, and I don't have anybody to answer to. So if I want to say something, then I will vocally say it, and there's nobody to stop me. There's nobody to say you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose your pay packet, because I don't get paid for doing any of what I do. I've done this voluntary for 13 years. I've never had a penny off anybody to help me, as in with like off the council or off the schools or anything like that. I do it myself, and I do it myself because I don't ever want money to be an issue or a barrier between me going into a school or a school having me in, if that makes sense. Because quite often schools don't have the money to have outside visitors in. So I have given myself freely. I've spoken to probably almost 300,000 people today, and that's just like in the schools, colleges, and universities. Because I can't put a number on the people that I've spoke to in public or like this, how many people this would reach, or how many people an article would reach, or a podcast, or whatever. That's just physically the people that I've physically spoken to, physically reached, which is a massive number.
I completely agree with you, and that's very much why I'm doing this project. Is I got tired of hearing the same 1 or 2 minute video clips of a tragic story. I think, as somebody who works in aquatics, and my background is in pools primarily, but in Canada we have a lot of lakes and we're all working towards increasing water safety. But to hear somebody like you and your story, a couple minutes doesn't capture your story. It doesn't capture your experience trying to reach people, doesn't capture Dylan's story. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in different parts of our industry to really have learnings and takeaways, whether it is cold water shock knowledge, quarry risk knowledge, open water knowledge. I mean, 13 Celsius may not seem as cold as our glacier lakes, but I know from managing pools, people complain if it's below 21 or 20. It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Your son was how old at the time of his death?
He was 13, but he was really, really like big for his age, and he was strong, and he was the
Hmm.
athlete of his school. He was so physically fit, like he'd just do backflips, and I literally can't put into words how physically fit he was, and how much like he'd been swimming since he was 8 months old. It's still it still to this day bewilders me how my son could have lost his life. He was only underwater for 3 minutes in total. And I'll never forget. I'll never forget that day of getting the call. I wasn't there when it happened. I was at a football match. I was at a football match with one of my other children, and I received a phone call basically saying that Dylan was in trouble at the quarry. Now, I didn't think for 1 second that it would be the water that would be the issue. I thought he'd fallen, and I thought I was going to go to broken bones. I thought potentially he was trapped somewhere. I just remember being in that police car en route. I remember looking over to the police officer's speedometer, and he was doing 100 miles an hour in a 40 zone. And I knew at that point that something weren't right. I didn't know what, but I knew that something weren't right. I remember rocking backwards and forwards, holding my head, and literally just begging. I prayed. I've never ever prayed, but I begged and prayed that Dylan would be all right. And then we got to about a mile away from home, and the call came on the radio. It said code 1 or code 9, and I still haven't had the bottle to ask which one it is. But I just know that that was the actual moment that my son was pronounced dead. And I was so close, but so far away when he needed me. When I arrived at the quarry, it was like something out of a movie scene. There was people everywhere, police everywhere, fire brigade everywhere, ambulances, black cars. And when I'd spoken to my husband on the phone, I'd said to him, "What I think on, I was still thinking Dylan had fallen from a height. I said, whatever happens, do not let him go to the hospital on his own, he'll be scared." So when I got to the quarry, my husband was actually in front of the ambulance, not letting the ambulance leave. And he shouted over to me that Dylan was dead. And I just collapsed to the floor. I was only out for a minute, maybe 2. When my husband came over to comfort me, the police ushered the ambulance out, and I was screaming for them to let me get in the ambulance with my son. And they said I couldn't because he was in a mess. All the time from then, I was thinking I'm going to view my son and he's going to be cut, battered, bruised. And there wasn't a mark on him. There wasn't a single mark on him. His hair was still wet. This was 2 hours after. I only was allowed to see Dylan 2 hours after he died. Maybe even closer to 3. It was around about 7 o'clock, I remember. And I remember being given Dylan's belongings before we could go in and identify his body. That's what we was doing. We was crossing the T's and dotting the I's for the authorities. I remember going in and just hugging Dylan's body, and just that's where I made the promise that this wouldn't be for nothing, and that his life was worth more than this, and this shouldn't have happened, and I would have traded places with him, and I still would, but I can't. I don't want any parent or anybody to go through this, and it's so frustrating that it's continually happening and authorities don't do anything to prevent it. It's how can they leave people like this continually? In the UK, we lose 600 lives a year. How can we continually lose 600 lives a year? And that has been a consistent since Dylan died. So for 13 years, we've lost 600 lives in the UK. 600 mums like me. That's just here. Obviously, in your country, I don't know your statistics, probably much bigger because it's a much bigger country, but there's hundreds of thousands of parents out there, just like me, that didn't have a clue. And a bit of education would go so far.
I mean, one of the amazing things about what you're doing, Beckie, is sharing that message, because it's so difficult for so many families to continue on. And I completely respect any family that doesn't have the energy to continue to relive that grief. But what you're doing is really, really incredible.
Absolutely, and I don't think that anybody else should be out there doing what I'm doing. That's not kind of what I'm saying. I mean, there's other people feeling how I feel. Like I could sit in a corner and cry like this every single day, and I would do that. But what's the point? Who's that serving? What good
Yeah.
is that doing? If I sit and cry on a school stage and tell the children about Dylan, tell the children about water safety, teach them, the things that I didn't know, the things that I let Dylan down with, then just maybe I can make a difference, and just maybe it can be a positive one, and just maybe there are people out there that have lived because of Dylan's story. I mean, I am saying quite honestly that we lose 600 lives every year in the UK, and we have done continually for all those years. But a lot of people would say, well, nothing's changed then. Nothing's changed. What's the point of you doing what you're doing? I totally disagree with that, because open water swimming and recreational swimming and swimming in open waters and going and just trying it has increased massively since COVID, since lockdown. And if there is so many more people actually partaking in this and still losing the same amount of people, then we are winning the battle. Do you know what I mean? Because there's more people risking their lives, but we're still losing the same amount of people, if that makes sense. To me, the numbers are going down, but they're not. If the actual statistics aren't, but the amount of people that go swimming is going up, which to me says the statistics are.
I think you've hit the nail exactly on the head. There's been a shocking increase in open water swimming events, access, interest, and then you could also carry on other topics that are also scary in terms of breath holding and cold water plunge and all these things. More people are doing it, exactly what you've said. And so I think even just holding the line is evidence of your efforts and everyone's efforts to at least increase that awareness, because cold water shock, however people think of it, I mean, your child was athletic, he was young, he was vibrant. 13 Celsius could be cold to some, warm to others, but the point is that it caused a otherwise healthy child, right, to be unable to swim when he had swimming skills. And I think
Absolutely.
that's the problem, is everybody think it won't happen to them. It's only, the stereotype is only weak swimmers or poor swimmers or non-swimmers, but
That's
he was.
it. I always get told that. That's one of the first things people ask. Could he not swim? Well, yeah, he could. He was an absolutely amazing swimmer. Did you not take him to swimming lessons? Yes, of course, I took him to swimming lessons. That's not the issue. And not only that, we've also got to take into consideration that a lot of these people that are losing their lives in open water never intended on getting wet. They didn't go out for a swim. They didn't. They might have slipped or tripped. They might have been on a dog walk. They might have been cycling. There's so many, like you said at the beginning, they could have been taking a picture because it's a tourist destination. There's so many reasons why people find themselves in open water, and it's not necessarily just because they've wanted to go swimming. So if you're not necessarily a good swimmer, you still should clue yourself up about open water, because you could find yourself in that situation where you need to be rescued, or you're in that situation where somebody in front of you needs to be rescued, and you need to ensure that you stay safe in order to help that person. So like obviously not putting yourself at risk and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? Helping from the side if you can. Because quite often one casualty will turn into three because two people have jumped in to help.
Well, and I think that's just it. Is I wonder what has been the reception you've heard to your message, in terms of, do people know what to do? I think that's another gap in our knowledge, is people don't know what to do if they get into distress.
No, I don't think people do know what to do, and I think it's only just really like coming to the surface of things, of what we could do, i.e. float to live and stuff like that. But personally, and this is only my personal opinion, but in a cold water shock situation where you've jumped off a cliff, for instance, to get in the water, quite often you don't resurface, you don't have a chance to float to survive. Do you know what I mean? So that message doesn't work in that situation. In that situation, there is no message other than not to do it. And people say you can't just say to people, don't do something because that's going to make them do it more. Well, actually, if it's going to, risk their life, then you can. We wouldn't encourage playing on a motorway. We wouldn't encourage playing on a freeway. So why would we encourage swimming in open water when it's so risky and so dangerous without any skills or knowledge?
Well, and I think that's one of the big challenges here in Canada is all of our efforts in water safety, in my opinion, just as one Canadian, are focused on pools. And pools with lifeguards are not the site of most drowning occurrences. It is the lakes, the rivers, the unstaffed apartment building, condo pools. It is the ocean. It is skating. People break through when they're skating. And it's that area I think we need to focus more of our efforts. And for us in Canada, a piece of that is also quarries. There are quarries where there are open invitations for people to swim. And on Instagram, on my Instagram stories a few days ago, I asked, who knows of quarries where swimming is encouraged or not prohibited or not discouraged? And I must have had 5 or 6 places in Canada that were sent to me. And I just don't understand why that's not a bigger topic of
Yeah,
conversation.
it's crazy because the mixed messages is almost as bad as the uneducation, if that makes sense. Like, so 1 minute saying this quarry's all right to go to, but this quarry's not, or this is a good place to go open water swimming, but this isn't. Like, they all open water holds the same risks. Doesn't matter where it is, they all hold the risk of them being cold, they all hold the risk of having underwater debris, they all hold the risk of you getting cold water shock, they all hold the risk of there being stuff in there that you don't know about, they having undercurrents, pollutants, like you name it. You just don't know, you can't see, and it's the things that you can't see that's potentially going to cost you your life. Do you know what I mean? So people need, I just think people really need to educate themselves more, regardless of whether they think they want to go open water swimming or not, just to clue themselves up so that they can be more cautious when near open water. I have like a safe code, stay away from the edge, and like when I go into primary schools and stuff, I tell the kids, if you're going to walk by canals, like lakes or whatever, reservoirs, if you're going to go on a family picnic or whatever, just take an extra step away from the edge of that water. Just try and keep, and all these little things, if they could be processed correctly and was continually said, I think would make a difference. But when it's mixed messages, it's difficult. It is difficult, and like you say, you're quite rightly, in some places it's encouraged, and in some places it's not. That's exactly, my son just said something there that I was actually thinking about. Like water safety should have something like the Green Cross code. Like I say, no lifeguard, no swimming. That's kind of like my motto, as in the Green Cross code. But it is, we teach people about road safety, and we teach people about cycling efficiency over here in the UK, but we don't teach people about water safety. But more people die in water than in fires and cycling incidents, so that makes no sense.
It's the same here. We justly have identified fire, or let's say car accidents, as a major risk. We teach people how to install car seats. We teach children how to cross the road. Those deaths or injuries have dropped precipitously in the years that we've done that. Now it's time to turn our attention, I think, to what you're saying in terms of open water swimming. What are some
Absolutely.
things that you would like to see changed either in your area or nationally in terms of water safety education?
I'd like to definitely see a cold water shot put on the national curriculum. I mean, we've been told over here in the UK it's going to get put on this year, but I'm not confident because I've not had any word back. However, we'll see. I'm not going to lose hope just yet. But really, like I said at the beginning, and like I keep saying, for me, it's about installing these life-saving equipment. It's about getting more people trained in lifeguarding. It's about ensuring that our children understand that you do have to use adequate PPE if you're going to go into open water. It's not just a case of a swimming costume is going to keep you safe. What I'd like for people to understand is, and I do share this quite a lot, is if you just take a little look at what a swiftwater rescuer, their actual equipment, what they put on, and they've been trained in water rescue, some of them for 20, 30 years, whatever, and they won't get in the water without that kit on. That tells you something, that speaks volumes. But yet every year, year after year after year after year, we're pulling bodies out of water in a pair of shorts or shorts and a t-shirt. That isn't adequate. That isn't going to protect you. That isn't going to save your life. For me, it's about getting the message out there. For me, what I'd like to see change massively is the like I feel like the government could do more. Warning, just like they used to do it. They used to have adverts, like in the 70s. They used to have adverts. It was called the Grim Reaper or something, and it was quite scary. I'm not going to lie, but that probably, scared a lot of kids into not going into open water. So awareness campaigns, ensuring that these children are actually learning and the parents are learning. And nationally, I'd like to see more parents understand, because this feeling of guilt that I have, I'm not sure it's fair, but it'll never leave me. Do you know what I mean? Like I said, I couldn't teach something that I didn't know, but it was my job to teach him that.
I hope that guilt leaves you, but I could understand why it might not. And what you're doing at least will help other families hopefully prevent these types of situations. This work is incredibly difficult. Is there anything that you're hopeful about what you're seeing in the industry, or hopeful about what you're doing that keeps you going on the difficult days?
Yeah, but like if I'm having a really bad day, or if I'm having a day where I think, you know what, today I just can't face the world, I go over the messages that the teenagers send me after I've been into a school, and to know that I make that much difference is kind of it helps. It helps to know that when I go into schools and colleges, that they are listening to me, that they're not just hearing me, they're listening to me and hearing me. Do you know what I mean? And there's a
Mhm.
difference. There's a difference. And I'm inundated with messages when I come back from schools and colleges. Like I said, that's what keeps me going on my dark days. And I also think my children, obviously, like I've got 3 other children that I have to be strong for. I didn't ask for this hand of cards to be dealt to me. I didn't ask for this life. It was just given to me. And my 3 children, on the day that they lost their brother, they lost their mum and dad as well, because we've never been the same. And we're never going to be the same. And that's tragic. That's really tragic that my 3 children never get to see me happy, like actually 100% fully happy. Do you know what I mean?
I can only imagine how difficult it would be. I've talked to a number of people over the years who've experienced drowning fatalities, drowning injuries, and it's unfortunately it's a bigger group of families than we would like who've experienced something like this. And
It's ridiculous amount of families, to be honest, and the government should be ashamed to think that, and all governments should be ashamed to be allowing their citizens to just drown like this, to just lose their lives like this. They're worth more. Our children, our loved ones are worth more than this.
for the quarry in your specific area, is it privately owned? Is it public land? Do you know?
It's privately owned, so basically, I don't know if it's the same over in Canada, but over here, if you own or you're the director of a company, business, whatever, and you could be, I don't know what the right words to use without sounding discriminatory, but if you could be a part of the death,
Mm-hmm.
then you can be held corporately responsible. However, over here, if you're the director or the owner or whatever, you can also plead Rule 23 or Rule 43, it might be, at the Coroner Court, and which basically means you don't have to answer any questions. So the owner of the quarry where I live where Dylan died, when I wanted to ask him things like, did you know you should have had signs up? Did you know you should have had them fences fixed? Did you know my son shouldn't have been able to access your quarry as easily as he should? I wasn't allowed to ask those questions because every answer was, right, I plead Rule 23. And literally they didn't care. They didn't care. It was just another statistic to them. Like I say, I mean, the quarry's still there. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. It's been drained once in the 13 years, and now they've let it fill back up. Nothing's changed. The signs that they've got out, the paper laminates. The coroner told the company that they had to put water safety signs up, and they put up paper laminates. Now, if that's not an insult, I don't know what is.
We have occupiers liability here, which is somewhat similar. You need to take reasonable efforts to prevent people from accessing your facility. So if your fence is broken, your door is left open, then your organization is somewhat culpable, but it as you know, in the court system, it's not always successful that the people who are responsible take responsibility or are
And
enforced.
it wasn't responsibility that I was looking for, really. It was change. I wanted them to know, like, did you know that this sign could have saved my son's life? And other people have died at that quarry previously, so the owners knew that it was a risk, it was a risky place. And the fence panel that was missing, it had been missing for over 10 years. We'd lived around here for like 10 years, and it'd been missing the whole time we've lived here. We'd never seen that fence panel in place. And yeah, they should excuse me, they should be made to be more responsible. They should be made to at least answer our questions. Like I say, I wasn't looking for responsibility. I wasn't looking for anybody to blame. I blamed myself enough. I didn't need somebody else to blame. I was already blaming myself. But I did need answers, and I did want change. And I think that's where things can happen. Like I've done so much for water safety, like so much has changed. I know organisations that didn't do anything prior to me losing Dylan, and only have started doing something probably 2-3 years after me doing it for Dylan. So I know that speaks volumes that you couldn't allow me as a mum to be making more noise than you as a company, and it's your job. Do you know what I mean? Or a charity or an organisation or whatever you are. Um, and I think that was massive, really. I think that was a massive turning point for me. So like maybe 3-4 years into doing it for Dylan, I started to see other organisations that should have already been doing it, to be quite honest, getting involved and putting more of an effort in, doing more, having drowning prevention days, having awareness days, doing multi-agency events, all sorts of things to try and prevent or raise awareness at least on the situation. Because raising awareness is almost as good as education. It's almost as good as education. Like this video is almost as good as educating somebody about the dangers. It's not, to me, it's not quite, because I've not got every single thing across that I'd like to get across, as in, like, you don't want to sit and listen to my school presentation, for instance, do you know what I mean? But there's so much that you could go into right now.
Well, I think everything that you're doing has a value in the sense that I already know, for me, your shower analogy is going to stick with me, because I'm like that as well. When I teach pool operations, I use very simple analogies, cooking rice, for example, or coffee machines, to help people understand what are more complex equipment, but it has to be relatable or it's not going to stick. And I think the shower is a great example, because we've all accidentally gotten into the shower where it wasn't the right temperature and it was cold and we stepped back and we were safe. But
Yeah.
to have that relation for somebody who it may only happen once in their life, but it could save their life if they understand the risk.
That's the closest thing that I can possibly think of that's like cold water shock, because it does take your breath away when you get in a shower and you've got cold, oh, it's kind of like one of them moments, isn't it? So I do think that that's one of the reasons why I found that was really relatable to kids, because most people do have showers. Most people have done exactly what we've just talked about, got in the shower, put the temperature on wrong, or the person before them have had it on lower than what they've wanted it. It might not have necessarily been freezing, but it still give them that instant. Some people will remember the phenomenon that went round, the ice bucket challenge again. You could see in people's faces as they was chucking that cold water over their head, and they were safe because it was, they were safe to an extent because it was only water being chucked over their head, but you could still see that massive shock, reflex. And if there was actually in a pool or in a body of open water or a quarry, then the chances of them getting out of that situation would be slim.
So you mentioned the coroner's inquest directed the company to post signage. Was there anything else that you learned in that inquest that you didn't know or you found helpful in terms of the messaging that you've created?
Yeah, so the coroner told me that Dylan had died of a dry drown. He said that there was no water in Dylan's lungs, and so I was teaching about dry drowning when, obviously, after Dylan passed, I was teaching about dry drowning in schools and secondary drowning and stuff like that. And that was the only thing that I ever got picked up on. Some people from the authorities asked me to stop actually teaching about secondary drowning and dry drowning because it wasn't recognised anymore. And actually, when I looked into it, the World Health Organization had actually asked for it not to be recognised since the year 2000. And my son died in 2011. So it should have never been mentioned at my son's funeral, my son's inquest, sorry. So then that has then given me the education, I suppose, to then be able to go out and help other families. So I've been to numerous inquests with families since losing Dylan, so that I can ensure that, one, they don't speak about secondary drowning and dry drowning. I have actually had to pull a coroner up for this before, and say, can you please leave? Can you go and just double check what you're saying, because you're giving the family false information. We're not supposed to use terminology like that and stuff like this. To which the coroner did leave, went and checked what he needed to check, came back in and absolutely refuted what he'd said and took out the fact that it was a dry drowning or a secondary drowning. So I've definitely been able to do that for families as well, which has been, I suppose, comforting to families. And I've been a shoulder to a lot of families. Some families don't have anyone. Some mums don't have a partner or somebody to share this grief, this nightmare with. So I have been that shoulder for quite a lot of families, quite a lot of people. I actually set up a page on Facebook called FAD, which is Families Against Drowning, where it is families. There's a few authority people in there, but it's mainly families. So if any families want to go on there and ask any questions, or just say, you know what, I'm having a really bad day today. Is anybody feeling what I'm feeling? That's what it's there for, just so that it runs itself, really, because it's not very, very active, I'm not going to lie, but I'm pretty sure that people have made a lot of friends through that, if that makes sense. Writing one post, then somebody else comments on it, and then before you know it, they're friends and they've built up a relationship, and then they don't need FAD anymore because they've got a shoulder, they've got a friend, they've got somebody to rely on. Do you know what I mean? So that's been, I suppose, something that was quite challenging to set that up, but it's set up and it runs itself, like I say. So it is there, and I think that if we could do one thing in the world, it would be to have public safety announcements. That's what I was going to say before. Public safety announcements, whether on the telly, throughout children's programs, throughout the soaps that the adults are watching and the parents are watching, throughout films at the cinema where they're putting the adverts on, get some warnings out there, and we might see a change. Who knows? And what have we got to lose? What have we got to lose by trying these simple things?
I think there's so much we can be doing about water safety education. I know for me, one of the things that really frustrates me is when I see these legacy larger organizations They come out with the same posters, the same pamphlets, the same tables at a school fair, which is fine. But the most compelling ones are the ones that really stick with me. I know there was one out of Ireland recently that was narrated by Liam Neeson, and it was very darkly lit with a candle. Or they've had one out of Australia recently where it's got a curse word kind of blurred out in the campaign, and it lands better because it's more innovative, it's more interesting,
Yeah,
it's less safe, but it's more direct, and it
yeah.
gets to the heart of the message.
Shock advertising is definitely something. So when I go into colleges, I've been into a few colleges whereby I've spoke to like design students, and they've been able to work on doing it for Dylan for like a whole year. And then they've produced either a poster or a pamphlet or a leaflet or whatever. And I actually went to a university in Swansea a good few years ago now, and basically spoke to the children, the teenagers, give them a presentation, and they was then told they was given free fold. They could do what they wanted. They could make a poster. They could do something, anything to prevent drowning. They could do, and the posters that we got back from that was absolutely unbelievable. To the point of I ended up taking a chief fire officer with me to Swansea University to judge these posters, and we was only going to judge them to have one winner for the first fire services water safety week. In fact, we ended up picking 7. It was that good, and we could have picked more. But um, the main poster that we picked, I suppose, as our winner was a guy that was wrapped in cling film, and he was showing him in the water, and it was saying this is what it's like to enter cold water, like because you become incapacitated, you can't move your arms, you can't move your legs, you feel like you're wrapped in cling film. And then she went into showing how she'd made this so nobody actually ever got wet other than in a bath. The splash effect she showed was a melon she chucked into a river. It was absolutely phenomenal what she'd done, like the design side of it. But looking into all that and the build up of the poster was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. But the actual shockingness of the poster, it had people talking. That's not what it's like to swim in open water. That and if you can cause a bit of controversy, I suppose, where open water's concerned, then yeah, you're going to get people on your back and you're going to get people questioning or whatever. I've had it for 13 years. I'll go onto a page, I'll write something about water safety. I'll get, for instance, this is just an example. I'll get a young lad, teenager, 19-year-old, and he'll turn around and say, you don't know what you're talking about. I've swum in Quarry loads of times. I've done this, I've done that. I've swum in Canal, blah, blah, blah. Then I've turned around and said, okay, right, you've done all that. Do you know what cold water shock is? Do you know how to save yourself if you get into any trouble? Do you know this? Do you know? And before you know it, me and this 19-year-old were friends. And at the beginning, he was trying to say that I was stupid for having a point. Do you know what I mean? But by the end of it, I don't want to leave it with, oh, you do you and I'll do me kind of thing. I want to leave it with, no, actually, let's sit and have a conversation about it. We're both adults here, you know what I mean? And let's see where we can get to at the end. And if you still choose that you want to go and partake in something that's risky and going to potentially cost your life, then that's up to you. And if you don't want to, or you want to do it safer after you've spoken to me, again, that's up to you. Like I say, this young man actually ended up, he apologised, which was shocking, really, absolutely shocking.
But I think it's those individual conversations. And I think water safety is so much bigger than one big message. It's so many little messages. I mean, I can say for me, as somebody who watches a lot of water safety campaigns, I truly never understood the UK canal safety videos. And then
Yeah,
last month, I was in Chester, England for the first time, and there was a canal behind my hotel with no fence, no lights. People are stumbling home from the pub on these cobblestone streets. And
yeah,
I get it now. I never
yeah.
understood these canal campaigns. And it would make sense that you can't have the same messaging in the same countries, or it's different for every age or every city or every country.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've always had one of my slides for my presentations has always been, um, sorry, it's always been um, about edges, slopes, slippery edges. Like when you get into the water, make sure you know how you can get out because often the edges can become really slippy and you can't get a grip, And I used to say it, but I used to like really quickly go over that slide because I was a bit like, no, I don't know. I just didn't really, like you, didn't really get it. But then one day, not too long ago, really, probably within the last 6 months, I went to local canal. Me and my husband, we was having some lunch. We just had a sandwich by the canal, and basically an old man had come down with his dog, and a swan had attacked it. The dog had gone to attack the swan. Now it didn't get the swan, but the swan got into the water. But then the dog got into the water. The man managed to get the dog out of the water and carried on walking down the canal, but then the dog got back in because the swans had gone further down the canal. At which point, the old man, who's probably in his 80s, is climbing down the slope of the embankment of the canal, holding on to blades of grass, trying to scoop his dog out of the water. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I need to go and get the throw lines out of the car. I need to now become a lifeguard. And he luckily did get out, but I could see how that could have very easily ended in him falling in the water, or even, a worst case scenario, tragedy.
Mhm. Well, and the same visit I was in Chester, I walked the length of the canal. It's a beautiful city. And near the end, there's the lock system. And we have
Yeah,
a lock system in Ottawa where I grew up because they used to do logging and they put the logs in the lock system to float them down to the St. Lawrence River. But the locks there are barricaded, there's fences, you don't go on the locks. And as I'm walking through Chester, people are just crossing across the locks to get from one side of the canal to the other. And it's a
yeah,
the
yeah,
10-meter drop. I couldn't believe it. No
yeah,
signage, no fences, no warnings, no, please don't do this. I watched 3 or 4 people just cross across the locks, and then you're looking down in between the locks, and as you've said, it's slippery edges, straight sheer walls. There's no way they could climb out. There's no way
exactly.
anybody would hear them. This is at sunset. There's no
Yeah.
lighting nearby. It was just shocking to me.
That's the thing. So that's like when you were saying before about other countries and other places, everybody needs to have different things in place. That's exactly what does need to happen. So, like, a canal, for instance, might need better lighting. A quarry might need better signage or better fencing. A river might need better fencing and life-saving equipment. Do you know what I mean? So everywhere might need a different message or a different something or a different input, but everywhere needs something. Everywhere needs something, even if it is just that initial message of, if you fall in, then do this. If you get into trouble, then ring this person. Knowing who to call, knowing what to do, all makes a massive difference and potentially could save somebody's life.
Well, and I found it so interesting because I don't know the Chester government. I'm not knocking this beautiful city I visited, but I passed many public defibrillators throughout the town where there was clear instructions how to call for an ambulance, how to use the defibrillator to open it and help somebody in cardiac distress. And in my mind, those are very similar things, very easy things to do for the community safety, but yet we're very aware of one issue and maybe not another.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just at the moment I'm working with well, I'm a volunteer. Everything I do, like, so I say working. I'm joining a company that makes. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, the Aquatic. It's actually one of the guys that's made it. I think comes from Canada, but I believe. And this is like an underwater sonar camera it's AI assisted. And I
Mm.
went and got a bit of training on it a couple of weeks ago up in Scotland, and it was phenomenal. Like within what did I say? With 45 seconds, I'd picked up the person under the water with the camera, and I've never been trained in water rescue or any kind. I don't profess to know anything about water safety in that respect, as in getting into the water. But I literally found the casualty, which was obviously a diver that we'd put in the water. Within 45 seconds, it was a phenomenal piece of kit, and apparently it can scan an acre within, I think, 2 seconds. I want to say 2 seconds, but I'm going to say a minute because I feel like that might be too much.
I think there's incredible advances being made in drowning detection technology, like you've said. I'm connected to 2 committees that are helping with that. I'm actually going to Switzerland next week for the ISO committee. And so we work on the standard for commercial pool technology, but that is meant for in large commercial pools. There
Right.
is separately people innovating, like you said, for open water, for beaches, for lakes, for quarries. Unfortunately, I did go on a boat ride a few years ago with a nonprofit who was searching for the body of a victim at the bottom of a lake with, with a undersea camera system. So I think it has incredible potential, and each company is doing what they can. But I think it's going to take us a little while for everyone to be able to then close the gaps in where can we install this? How do we educate people? At this point, it seems, for me anyway, it's a lot more body recovery, which is
Yeah.
important, but not so much on the prevention end, which we really need.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, they're quite happy to spend £1 million to recover a body, but they're not happy to put £1 into preventing the loss of life, which makes no sense because they reckon it costs roughly in the UK £1 million to recover a body, and that's everything. I'm talking police, ambulance, fire brigade, possibly a helicopter, your coroner, your inquest, everything. I'm pretty sure it covers everything, but £1 million a lot of money, and if we're losing 600 lives a year, that's potentially £600 million a year on death.
And how much more could we save by educating people on the front end of that and create better habits or better knowledge?
Exactly. I mean, communication is key. Like, one company or organisation or whatever, communicating with another, collaboration. Sorry, not communication. Collaboration is key. Like, it's not just about companies and organisations joining forces. They need to join forces with the little people, like you say, like myself, like other parents that are out there on the ground doing this, because we're the ones with the real life story. We're the ones with the real life heartache. We're the ones that have got something that somebody could potentially relate to. If you're going in and you haven't got a story or something relatable to, then you are literally just telling a story. You are literally just giving a lesson. And I'd like to think that I give a lot more than a lesson. I'd give them I give them life skills. I teach them life skills. I give them something, knowledge that could potentially save their life or somebody that they love's life.
And it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because last week Apple filed a patent for their watch to try and develop drowning prevention technology. And so I went and I was doing some research into the patent and the different comments on the patent. And I found some images that were filed with the patent. And to make a very long story short, I filmed an hour-long rant that I'll post on YouTube at some point. But one of the limitations that struck me about their patent filing was they had not talked with anybody who's actually witnessed a drowning. All of their purported algorithms that they were patenting were related to irregular swimming technique movements, which is
Yeah.
not how a drowning presents. And so I'm very concerned that it's a great idea, but if it's based on how you or I appear when we're swimming, and then we get into distress while swimming, but you still expect us to be horizontal, or you still expect us to look like we're swimming, then you've missed the mark completely.
Yeah, you've missed the point totally. And it's a bit scary for one person or company to have that patent in it if they're not going to get it right, especially. So fingers
Absolutely.
crossed they do a lot more research. I mean, I've been bewildered over the years. I mean, even down to silly adverts. I mean, Bird's Eye did an advert, and it was basically they was promoting a little boy jumping into the sea, and they was basically saying this Captain Birdseye loves nothing better than watching his grandson jump into cold water on a hot day. Now, I'd been teaching water safety for a number of years at this point when this advert came out. My daughter seen the advert. She was only young. She'd seen it on a kids program, whatever. It'd come up, and she was questioning what I'd been teaching her about water safety. And I was like, I'm not having this. So I contacted Birdseye, and I said, look, you can't have reference to cold water and hot day in the same thing. Like, you do understand what you're doing. Like, you've literally ripped back everything that I've taught people for the last 8 years or whatever, because that's probably how long it was at that point. To which they was really, really, really good. We had a full board meeting that same day at 5 o'clock with the director of Birdseye. There was, I think, 5 people around the table on their side, and there was me at my side. And I basically I just let rip and basically said that it was absolutely out of order what they'd done and what could be done about it going forward. And they couldn't believe the amount of safety that they had put in place for this little boy to jump into the water. They couldn't believe that they'd actually let it go out with no warnings or no water safety advice or anything. Do you know what I mean? They couldn't, it was almost like I was turning a cog in their head. So they said, right, well, we'll pull that advert. And I was like, what? They said, we'll pull that advert and we will change it. And they changed it to Captain Birdseye loves nothing better than watching his grandson swimming, which, although it wasn't far enough for me, I was happy. They took the reference to the cold water and the hot day out. About a week later, they contacted me back and said, we didn't think that that went far enough, and we've now basically said they've took the little boy out of the advert, and it now basically says Captain Birdseye loves nothing better than a sunset, which is ridiculous, but not ridiculous at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Like that one fish finger advert could have had adverse effects for me in my teaching of water safety. Do you know what I mean?
Well, and I think it's just sometimes we have these gaps in knowledge. I mean, I have a colleague who runs a swim school and had put up a Facebook post, and it was, I think he just literally didn't think about it because he said, to comment below how long you can hold your breath after taking swimming lessons at our swim school. And I said to him, so we want to encourage children to practice holding their breath in the bathtub? Like this could have terrible consequences. And he said, oh, I literally didn't think that. And now that you've said it, I can't unsee it, and deleted the Facebook post.
Yeah.
But he was, older in age, and thinking back to certainly when I was a kid, we all did breath holding contests. We didn't know any better. That was the culture. Now we know better, but we still have those gaps where we don't necessarily think how it could come across or what could happen.
Exactly, and we're all human, and we're all going to make mistakes. At the end of the day, like I'm sure that you'll pick this interview apart, and I'm sure there'll be mistakes that you think, no, that's not right, or that's not right. I like to just speak from the heart. I don't like to have anything scripted. I like to say it as it is, and I could literally speak all night about it because it is my passion, it is my life, it is what I do now from morning to night. I am constantly looking at drownings in our country, in other countries. What can we do in this? I mean, I got a guy from Kenya contacting me asking me if I could speak to his parishioners at his church because, and now I'm actually having to educate myself on. So what does drowning look like in Kenya? Because I'm sure it doesn't look the same as what it looks like in the UK. Do you know what I mean? So now I have to clue myself up on drownings in Kenya before I can go out and talk to, well, not go out, I'm not going to Kenya, I'm going to do a Zoom, but before I can actually teach them, I need to teach myself why are they losing so many people in their country? And so far it's come down to their lifestyle. They have to go and fend for themselves, and that's how they get the clean water, and a lot of the times it's little children or parents are at work and they just don't know what the kids are doing. Do you know what I mean? But a lot of the times as well, over in these countries, we find that the water, as in swimming, it's not something that's done. They don't have money to eat, a lot of them, so they've not got money to have swimming lessons.
From my perspective, I have no desire to produce slick BBC grade interviews. I mean, my goal with these interviews, posting them on YouTube, is to give people the opportunity to hear from you and your passion and your story. When I go back and edit, I edit, blips that I make or blips that you make. But it's funny, our algorithm on YouTube is terrible because we'll post a 2-hour video, a 3-hour video, and I don't care because the point is if one person sees it, then it's done its job because it will save their life or it will educate someone else.
Exactly. And even if somebody just takes a snippet of it and uses it in a school or, teaches their child, like you say, you've took away today, the shower aspect of what I've said. Like, if every person that I've spoke to has took one thing away from my speaking to them, then my job's not been in vain. I've not done this for nothing. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think too, the other thing I love about a platform like YouTube is there's a lot of challenges that I have and other people might have right now with other social media platforms like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok and how they promote what they consider to be the best content. And these stories are not the best content. They are depressing, they are tragic, but they are necessary. And I think one of the things that I have found amazing about YouTube is you'll find things on there that you didn't know you were interested in. And conversely, I've had comments from people saying, I had one 2 weeks ago that was like the highlight of my month, where a non-pool industry person found a safety video about entrapment and said, I have very long hair. I didn't know that there were risks of my hair getting pulled into mechanical openings. And so now I will be aware. And that
It's,
is just exactly what we hope for.
yeah, it's like the swimming costume posts and stuff. Like, make sure that you wear bright, visible clothing. Like, you probably won't think about it until you visually see it. When you visually see. So somebody posted a post the other day, and it was like, how many people or costumes can you see under this water? So you try and count them. You can see a blue one over there, green one over there, but nobody got the right answer. It showed
Hmm.
you the picture of how many swimming costumes was in that water, and the dull ones you couldn't see. The
Hmm.
darker ones you couldn't see. They was at the bottom of the water, whatever. So that's again like your attire, what you're wearing does make a difference, even in the recovery side of things, not just the rescue side of things. Obviously, we don't want people to be doing it, so we don't want to be rescuing people. Failing that, we want to be rescuing people. We don't want to be recovering people.
Well, and it's such a simple thing to do. I mean, it's one thing to say the blue, we call them bathing suits here, the blue bathing suit is on sale, that's what I can afford. But if you have the same shape or the same size in different colors, why not pick a bright one? If you've seen one of those Facebook posts or you've seen one of those TikToks that show that it's very hard to see blues and greens or grays underwater, right? But
Uh,
yet they're sold.
Yeah, I mean, again, the responsibility there again comes back to like shop owners, and it's just about making money. So, like, this is going to be totally off topic. It's still water related, but it's a little bit off topic, I suppose. But like the selling of the big unicorns and stuff, people then take them to the beach and they get washed away on them. They're meant for pools, but who's taking a 10 foot unicorn to a swimming pool? And what swimming pool's letting you come in with that anyway? So why sell them? Like, and if you are going to sell them, why not put a safety notice on them saying not for use at the sea, because it's likely to get dragged out. You know what I mean? I know our RNLI are inundated with call outs because people go into the sea on these giant unicorns or inflatables or whatever, and it's just it's constant and it's a joke. And you go by Blackpool or Brighton or whatever, and all along the prom, all along the water, they're selling these giant unicorns, almost putting it in your kids' faces.
Mhm. It's been a huge problem. Thankfully, knock on wood, this summer is better than it was 2 summers ago. But during the pandemic, when everybody was in their homes, I think it was summer 2021, every week or two, I was putting articles on our Facebook page about children falling off inflatables, or like you said, that it's attached to a rope that gets disconnected or it drifts away from where they can stand. And it was every week here in Canada that something was happening, and it was tragic. But it seems to have gotten a little bit better last summer, and I hope into this summer, where people realize that an inflatable is not a rescue device. It may not have the same quality of plastic as an inner tube that might be more sturdy. And really, putting kids or anybody of any age on one of these things doesn't mean that they're safe, no different from a
No.
paddleboard or any other equipment when they can't swim.
I literally went and I met a family whose children they'd been given some advice off RNLI, and they'd basically the dad had gone to the beach at Margate. He had a unicorn. The kids was on the unicorn. He literally turned around to speak to his wife for a second, turned back, and the kids was like being swept out to sea. He obviously swam after him. He couldn't catch up with them. He said eventually he could just see a black dot in the distance, and that was his children being washed out to sea, and he couldn't get to them. RNLI picked him up, but when they picked him up, they had a popped unicorn in the boat. So what went through his head at that moment, I have no idea. But the two girls had actually been rescued by a French passenger boat or something like that. It was really, really strange, but they'd actually gone into the channel. They'd actually floated out into the channel. It was unbelievable, unbelievable. And this is not a one-off story. This happens regular. Like you say, you can tether the unicorn or inflatable however you want, but there's still a risk that that's going to come untethered and you're going to end up in some kind of trouble. Best advice there is to just not take inflatables to the beach because that's not what they're intended for.
Mhm. No, I'm with you that it's part of the problem is access, whether they're sold at the beach, whether they're sold at your local store where people are buying water guns and balloons for a day in the backyard or whatever you're doing. It's just that it's they're marketed at kids. Kids want them, and then every parent wants to make their child happy, and they don't know the risks because there is no advisory, there is no education for parents, and there's a lot of hazards for kids. So I can appreciate how it's hard for parents to know what all those hazards are because every year there's different hazards.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent, would you look at that unicorn and think, well, that's going to keep my child safer than not having a floor or an aid? I don't know, but it's not. It's not going to keep your child more safe at all. The safest way that you're going to keep your child safe is by keeping your child within sight, within distance, so that you can reach them, and making sure that you've got your eyes on them at all time, no matter where you are, no matter what open water we're talking about here. If you're near any open water with any child, then you need to have your phone in your pocket and you need to be ensuring that your eyes are on your child. It's that simple.
So far, Becky, you've talked a lot about your son Dylan and his death 13 years ago. What about that story do you want parents to take away from that in terms of his story being a blessing and a memory for other people not experiencing the same tragedy?
I want everybody to just believe that there could be a Dylan. There could be my son if they're strong, healthy, fit, athletic, good swimmer. It doesn't matter how physically fit you are. The water doesn't discriminate, and I think that's the main point that I want to make to people is that the water doesn't discriminate who it takes, and you need to ensure that you are very observant around open water of any way, any kind. If a sign says stay out, keep out, no entry, no swimming, whatever, just follow it. You don't need to know why it's been put there. It could have been put there because of somebody like me fighting in memory of my son. So just think along those lines that I might have fought for 10 years to get that sign in place to try and warn you of the dangers. I think that the main thing that I want people to take away from today's interview is that Dylan was just like your child. Dylan was like any other child in the world. He was cheeky, he was lovely, he was kind, he was caring, he was considerate. Um, and he was loved. And none of them things mattered when push come to shove. When the day came that tragedy struck, not even his friends helped him. And people say, what about the parents? I'm like, I can't do any more as a parent than what I am doing. I did not know the dangers when my son passed away. And if I had, I would be living a different life and I'd be as oblivious as everybody else. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
unfortunately, Dylan did lose his life, and unfortunately, I did have to go down this path. And unfortunately, I am going to keep screaming from the rooftops, whether people like it or not. I'm not going anywhere. So
Hmm.
until change is implemented, I will continue to scream and shout and share my story and share my passion and just do all I can in the name of my son Dylan.
Hmm. So, Becky Ramsay, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Where can people find you online if they want to reach out to you, ask questions, or hear about your presentations with school groups? What's the best way for people to contact you?
Probably the most active that I'm on is Facebook. So I've got a Doing It for Dylan Facebook page. I've also got Doing It for Dylan on Twitter. I am on TikTok, but I'm not great on TikTok, so I probably wouldn't give that one a follow if I'm being honest. I have got a Doing It for Dylan.org website and that you can go on. But unfortunately, at the moment, the emails aren't coming through, so like as you know, so I'm not receiving the emails. So that's a bit of a bummer at the moment, but it is being looked at the moment. But if anybody wants to contact me, if you literally just Google search Doing It for Dylan, you will come across me. I am literally everywhere and everywhere. Um, yeah, and just literally on any social media platform whatsoever, you can find me. You can ask any questions you want. If you want any advice, if you want any posters, if you want pointing into the right direction for any videos, for schools, for presentations for yourself, anything like that. If you just want a bit of support, if you're going through what I'm going through, and you just want to reach out because want a bit of support, then yeah, reach out on any of those platforms, and I will be sure to be back in touch with you within a day or two.
Amazing. Well, I want to say a big thank you for your time. I know this is a really important message for you and you want to promote it, but it still is your time and you're, as you said, you're not compensated for it. So I really do appreciate your time and sharing Dylan's story, and hopefully people who are watching this can take something away to educate those around them to prevent this from happening again.
You're very welcome, and I hope the same too. I hope that even if this story reaches one person and changes the thought process of one person, then we've done our job.